the allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The order was delivered without ceremony, warning, or room for negotiation. Just minutes after a sealed collection of palace files reached Prince William, the future king authorized the removal of every remaining royal honor still connected to Meghan. One signature ended years of uncertainty. Yet the most devastating detail was not the punishment itself. It was the discovery inside those files that convinced William's silence was no longer protecting the monarchy. It was placing it in danger. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William entered a private Windsor room carrying a dark folder stamped for restricted review. The marking meant only a small group cleared to handle sensitive royal records could examine it. He remained standing through the opening pages, but his pace slowed when he reached a hidden memorandum tied to the months before Meghan and Harry left royal duties. By the final page, the prince had lowered himself into a chair and fallen silent. Catherine watched his face change before asking whether the contents could still be contained. She understood why the files mattered. They did not concern gossip or wounded pride. They recorded private royal discussions, protected because exposure could destroy trust inside the institution and reshape how the Sussex departure was understood. William looked at her and answered, "Not anymore." His voice carried no triumph. It carried betrayal. The directive before him was an internal royal order, a formal instruction used to change privileges and ceremonial connections within the household. It stripped Meghan of every remaining honorary association, palace privilege, ceremonial recognition, and symbolic honor linked to the crown. Those honors gave her no constitutional power, but their meaning was enormous. They were the final visible threads connecting her to the institution she had left. William removed one page before Charles saw the full collection. He placed his hand over it and told a waiting aide that only 3 people could read it. The records included correspondence, meeting summaries, and a document someone had tried to bury. Worse, that page suggested Meghan had not acted alone. A senior courtier placed the authorization sheet before him. William paused over her name, tightened his grip on the pen, and signed. The official gathered the papers, but the future king kept his hand on the final page for several seconds before releasing it. The order carried William's signature. The secret behind it carried someone else's protection. To understand why he severed Meghan's final royal connection, the story must now move beyond titles and paperwork, to the 3 people who stood to lose far more than public prestige when the consequences became painfully real. For William, the decision was an act of protection. For Meghan, it was an act of humiliation. For Harry, it was something even more painful, a final declaration that the brother he once trusted no longer believed reconciliation was possible. Behind the palace language and official signatures stood 3 people bound by memories they could not erase. Each believed they had been wronged. Each believed history would eventually defend them. Only one now controlled the institution's response. Meghan heard the decision through a call at her California home. The representative explained that her honors had been withdrawn. The honors were symbolic roles and ceremonial links rather than legal power, yet they kept her name attached to royal history. She asked him to repeat the wording. Before he finished, she rose from the table and walked away. Harry watched her stop beside the window and fall silent. He asked what William had removed. Meghan did not turn around. "Everything they could still take," she said. The words forced him to face what the directive meant. This was no temporary punishment, and no place was being preserved for a return. William carried a different burden. As the future monarch, he was responsible for protecting confidential royal systems, family stability, and public trust before those duties became his. The crown depended on private discussions remaining private, because one breach could weaken every promise made behind palace doors. Yet the prince knew the action would look personal. Catherine confronted that danger. She warned William that punishing Meghan alone would appear less like protection and more like revenge. especially when Harry's name appeared throughout the recovered material. He answered that the files separated emotional involvement from deliberate action. Catherine heard certainty in his voice, but she also heard pain. Meghan saw the distinction differently. She believed the palace had isolated her while shielding the man born inside it. Harry felt that accusation settle between them, because defending his wife now meant challenging his brother more than ever. Harry called William. The line rang, transferred, then ended without connection. He placed the phone face down, stared at it, and turned it over again. His second attempt reached the same silence. Charles received the summary alone. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the papers, and admitted that his deepest sadness was not the directive itself. It was seeing his sons communicate through official channels instead of speaking as brothers. Long before William's signature closed the door, one arranged palace meeting had pushed the family beyond repair. A warning had been ignored. A private promise had been broken. And the people inside that room would never agree on who betrayed whom first. Every royal fracture has a moment that later appears inevitable. This one began behind closed doors, during a farewell gathering meant to lower tensions before Meghan and Harry stepped away from official life. There were no cameras, no public speeches, and no hostile statements. Only a small group, a confidential understanding, and one warning delivered with absolute clarity. By sunrise, that understanding had been compromised, and William never forgot who had been trusted with it. William entered the small Windsor drawing room, determined to prevent another public wound. The gathering, later called the Windsor Farewell Meeting, had been arranged to settle security, family access, and the private transition plans guiding Meghan and Harry's departure. A confidential royal memorandum was prepared afterward, a written record preserving decisions made during sensitive discussions, and circulated among only a few trusted people. The Queen spoke with painful honesty. She feared the separation would harden into something permanent if private hurt became public argument. William listened, then turned to Meghan and asked her directly not to repeat the monarch's concerns outside that room. Meghan held his gaze, and promised the conversation would remain there. Harry heard the promise. He believed it should have ended the danger. 48 hours changed everything. William received notes prepared for an outside media advisor and recognized language the Queen had used during the meeting. The phrases were too close, too precise, and too private to dismiss as coincidence. Harry defended Meghan, saying she had sought guidance rather than leaked family secrets. Yet the prince felt his brother was protecting an explanation neither man fully believed. The surfaced files now carried the proof that had been missing. A forgotten administrative copy of the advisor notes contained handwritten corrections made before the palace publicly confirmed any transition details. Another page preserved a royal secretary's warning that private language was moving beyond authorized channels. That warning had been restricted, filed away, and never shown to William. William reviewed the documents late into the night. He placed the recovered page beside his own handwritten notes from the farewell meeting and followed the matching phrases line by line. His pen stopped over one repeated sentence. He circled it once, closed the folder with both hands, and understood why the betrayal had survived every attempt at reconciliation. Meghan refused to accept punishment without an answer. Through a documented request delivered to William's office, she demanded a private meeting with no advisors, no lawyers, and no family members between them. The hidden memorandum explained why he had acted, but it could not carry the emotional cost. That burden would fall on William and Meghan when they finally faced each other directly before the silence returned. When Meghan entered the room, William did not rise to greet her. When the door closed, neither of them offered small talk. Between them lay the directive bearing his signature and the file she believed had been interpreted against her. Years of public statements, private injuries, and family silence compressed into a single encounter. She had come to demand restoration. He had come to explain why restoration was no longer possible. Neither expected the other to apologize. Meghan had requested the meeting immediately, but William agreed only if Harry, Catherine, lawyers, and palace aides remained outside. They met in a neutral royal residence, rather than Buckingham Palace, making one thing clear: this was not a ceremonial audience. meaning a formal meeting granted by the monarch or a senior royal. This was personal. Nothing could hide behind protocol. Meghan wanted answers without witnesses, while William wanted a conversation that could not be reshaped by competing voices afterward. Meghan placed the directive on the table and asked why she alone had been punished when several people had seen the transition material. William answered that access was never the deciding issue. The question was, who carried private language beyond the family after promising it would remain confidential? Meghan pushed her chair backward and stood. She accused the prince of using institutional power to settle a family grievance. William stayed seated. "I used it because the family grievance became an institutional threat," he said. The words landed harder than anger, because they left no space for mercy. For William, the breach threatened every future private discussion. For Meghan, the punishment confirmed that royal belonging could be withdrawn the moment trust collapsed completely. Meghan denied authorizing any disclosure of the Queen's words. William opened the recovered file and turned one page toward her. A handwritten correction sat beside a sentence drawn from the Windsor discussion. The writing appeared to be hers. Meghan studied the mark and claimed it belonged to broader strategy notes, not the private meeting. William then read a phrase the late Queen had spoken behind closed doors. The document repeated it almost exactly. Meghan's anger weakened. Shock replaced it. Meghan lowered herself into the chair and asked where the page had been found. William did not answer. His silence suggested the location might expose someone else, and she immediately understood that the file contained only part of the truth. Meghan rose to leave, but stopped at the door. She told William that one missing message would change his understanding of who ordered the notes to be created. The prince watched her go, now facing a dangerous possibility. The files proved a breach, but they might not reveal who had truly controlled it. William signed the order, but royal power is rarely exercised by one hand alone. Before Meghan's honors could be removed, advisors examined precedent. Charles faced a choice between intervention and silence, and Catherine questioned whether justice could survive the appearance of revenge. The prince possessed the authority to recommend the action, yet authority was not the same as freedom. Every person around him understood that one wrong step could transform a protective decision into a lasting constitutional scandal. Charles received the recommendation alone. Honorary royal distinctions depended on the sovereign's approval and the royal household, the organization that manages official duties, ceremonies, and palace administration. William could drive the decision, but the king still had to permit it. Two choices waited before him: delay the directive for another review, or allow Meghan's removal to begin immediately. Charles reached the line carrying her name and stopped. He placed the paper beside a framed photograph of Harry, stared at both, then called the secretary back. The monarch knew the order might protect confidential systems, yet he also understood why it mattered personally. Once the final honors disappeared, the palace would no longer be preserving even a symbolic path for Meghan's return. Charles warned William that the action could destroy any chance of repairing the family. His son answered that reconciliation, built on concealed evidence, would be false. The prince did not sound victorious. He sounded trapped between the brother he had lost and the institution he would one day inherit. Catherine challenged him more quietly. She asked whether he would make the same decision if the person involved were someone he loved without reservation. William paused before admitting that the question was exactly why the choice hurt. Catherine saw that he wanted justice to look clean, even though family wounds never were. A records officer then delivered the detail that changed the room. During a routine classification review, meaning the process used to decide how sensitive documents should be stored or destroyed, staff had recovered the folder from an archive marked for disposal. Someone had labeled it irrelevant. The authorization code told an even darker story. It belonged neither to Meghan nor Harry, but to a former palace official who had worked closely with Charles's household. The king lifted his pen to delay the order, hesitated, then struck through the postponement clause. "Let the directive stand," Charles told the secretary. No fatherly instinct could now interrupt the process his own approval had finally released. The decision had survived his final hesitation. Now invitations would change, records would be revised, and the monarchy's quiet machinery would carry the punishment into Meghan's life, one erased privilege at a time. The fallout did not arrive as one dramatic announcement. It arrived through altered lists, withdrawn invitations, revised records, and calls that suddenly went unanswered. By afternoon, Meghan's honorary associations had received formal notice. By evening, her name had disappeared from restricted ceremonial schedules. The punishment was administrative, but its emotional message was unmistakable. The palace was no longer preserving a place for her return. For Harry, each change felt like another lock turning from the inside. Meghan opened the email. Palace staff had begun removing her access to ceremonial briefings, honorary correspondence, reserved royal accommodation, and future events connected to her former position. Ceremonial briefings were private instructions prepared for people attending official occasions, and losing them meant she would no longer be treated as someone expected inside that world. The message confirmed that Meghan's final honorary presidency had been withdrawn. Organizations linked to her service were ordered to remove any wording suggesting current royal endorsement, though their historical records would remain unchanged. She read the email twice, closed the laptop, and took a small royal insignia from a drawer. Meghan placed it on the desk without speaking. Harry wanted action. He urged her to release the full story before the palace defined it for them. Meghan refused. She warned that an emotional statement would let William present her reaction as proof that she could not protect private information. Harry heard the logic, but patience felt like surrender. William felt no victory in Britain. He had intended a controlled correction inside the institution, not a public spectacle of personal erasure. Each revised list made the decision more visible, and every withdrawn invitation turned a legal-looking order into something painfully human. The prince had protected the palace, yet the speed of that protection disturbed him. Harry's phone rang before evening. A former aide said he possessed the missing message Meghan had mentioned during her confrontation with William. Through a recorded call, the man claimed someone inside the palace had requested external strategy notes before the Sussex departure became public. The aide demanded a private meeting. He warned that the buried folder had been part of a wider effort to control blame, not merely preserve secrecy. Harry placed the call on speaker so Meghan could hear the sentence. Meghan reached for the insignia when the caller named the meeting place. Her fingers closed around it as Harry watched. The evidence might challenge William's conclusion, but using it required Harry to face his brother alone and decide whether he wanted vindication or peace. The palace had completed its punishment, but one missing message had opened a door, and only the two brothers could decide what waited beyond it. There were no secretaries in the room, no legal advisors, and no folders placed between them. William and Harry met as brothers for the first time since the order had been signed. Neither spoke. The years separating them seemed heavier than the walls around them. Harry carried the missing message. William carried the knowledge that evidence could change responsibility without repairing trust. This was no longer a battle over honors. It was a choice between being right and remaining family. Harry had arranged the meeting on one condition: no institutional representative could attend. An institutional representative was an official present to protect palace procedure, and he believed such a presence would turn honesty into negotiation. William accepted because another formal encounter would only deepen the distance between them. This time, the prince wanted to hear his brother without a secretary translating every emotion into language. Harry placed his phone on the table and opened a verified copy of the missing message. The document showed that a former palace communications official had requested Meghan's strategy notes after the Windsor farewell meeting. He then played a saved voice recording. The message asked her to summarize concerns surrounding the departure, but it never authorized her to repeat the Queen's private words. Harry accused the palace of creating the conditions for the breach and then allowing Meghan to carry the entire blame. William admitted the official had acted improperly, yet he insisted that she still chose which details to include. The distinction mattered to him because the wording came from a direct promise, not an ordinary briefing. Harry asked whether the punishment would have been as severe if Meghan had been born inside the royal system. William hesitated. He admitted that outsiders were often judged more harshly because the institution never fully learned to trust them. The truth wounded both men. William then revealed through the internal review that he had already dismissed the former official after tracing the archive code. Meghan was not the only person held responsible, yet her action remained the only one tied to a personal promise made in that Windsor room. Harry's anger faded. He looked down, pressed both hands against the table, and admitted he had known Meghan included the wording. He had chosen to protect her rather than correct the record. William refused to restore the honors, but he agreed to issue a statement confirming that several people had failed. The brothers left without embracing. William opened the door himself, then called Harry back by name. The honors would remain gone, but the truth was no longer simple enough for public condemnation, and the world would soon be forced to confront that complexity. By sunrise, the decision had escaped palace control. Broadcasters interrupted their schedules, newspaper presses changed their front pages, and crowds gathered beneath royal gates, demanding answers no official statement could fully provide. Some saw William as a future king, finally defending the crown. Others saw Meghan as the target of an institution unwilling to forgive defiance. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than every argument: two brothers leaving the same building through separate doors. The royal household released its announcement before the morning broadcast settled. The royal household was the organization responsible for official duties, palace administration, and public royal communication. Its statement confirmed the withdrawal of Meghan's remaining honors while admitting serious procedural failures by former palace personnel. It avoided accusing her of deliberate betrayal, honoring William's promise to Harry, but it made one fact final: the decision would not be reversed. A London newspaper answered with a front page dominated by 3 words: "The final severance." Beneath them appeared William signing the directive and Meghan attending her final royal engagement. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction became human. One woman held a sign reading, "Duty requires trust." Another lifted a handwritten message declaring, "Accountability must be equal." The crowd was divided because the issue was no longer only about secrecy. It was about whether justice had been applied fairly, and whether royal birth still determined who received mercy when private trust collapsed. Meghan watched a broadcaster describe the removal as the end of her royal story. She lowered the television volume and turned toward Harry, refusing to let public judgment drown out their private conversation. Harry reminded her that the palace had admitted wider failures. Meghan answered that shared blame did not lessen the humiliation of losing everything publicly. William saw the photograph of himself and Harry leaving separately. The image wounded him because it transformed a carefully reasoned order into something colder, one brother rejecting another before the world. A respected broadcaster then revealed, through a documented palace briefing, that a former official had been removed during the same review. Meghan had not been punished alone, under pressure from a deeply watching, unforgiving nation. Catherine entered William's study and found the newspaper folded to hide Meghan's photograph. She opened it, set it flat before him, and told him he had to face the human cost of what he had done. Public opinion remained divided, but the private verdict was settled. Meghan would not regain the honors. William would not withdraw the order. When the headlines finally faded, the monarchy faced a decision that could not be undone, and a final truth none of them could escape. In the end, there was no reversal, no hidden compromise, and no ceremonial path back. Meghan's remaining royal honors were permanently removed. William's order stood, yet the surfaced files did more than expose a broken promise. They revealed a family in which secrecy had become protection, protection had become manipulation, and love had repeatedly been asked to survive beneath the weight of royal duty. The final verdict was painful, because no single person carried all the blame, and no one escaped unchanged. William formally closed the review and confirmed that Meghan's honorary positions, palace privileges, and symbolic royal recognition would not return. The review was the official process used to examine evidence, responsibility, and palace conduct. His decision ended every remaining institutional link, but it also forced the monarchy to admit that its own machinery had helped create the crisis. The former palace official, who requested outside strategy notes, was permanently barred from royal service. William made the punishment part of the documented decision, proving that misconduct inside the institution would not be hidden merely to protect the crown. Meghan had broken a promise, but the palace had also built the system that encouraged secrecy and shifted blame. Meghan accepted that the honors were gone. She rejected a legal challenge and refused a public campaign to recover them. Instead, she placed the royal insignia inside a sealed box and closed the lid. Harry watched, then told her that defending their life together did not require denying every mistake. Meghan heard something new in his voice: loyalty without blindness. William stood alone in the room where he had signed the directive. He faced the empty space where the file had rested and understood that power could enforce a decision without making it painless. Charles reached both sons through separate handwritten messages. The king asked neither man for instant forgiveness. He asked them to stop using the monarchy as the language of personal hurt. Harry replied in writing, "I understand the decision. I do not accept all of it, but I understand." William folded the message and placed it inside a private drawer, not an official archive. Truth finally mattered more than royal survival. The verdict was final. Meghan's titles, privileges, and institutional role were finished, but every family connection was not destroyed. William protected the crown by closing its final door to her, yet the true victory came only when the family stopped pretending one person alone had broken what years of fear, silence, and mistrust had already weakened. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.